Taylor Stanfield watched the city of Boston from the top of his penthouse apartment. At 55 years old, he had built a real estate empire that granted him every material luxury he could ever desire. His fingers absent-mindedly traced the crystal of his whiskey glass as his eyes wandered over the urban landscape stretching below. By any conventional measure, he was a successful man, but loneliness had become his most constant companion. The sound of dishes being arranged in the kitchen interrupted his thoughts. Martha Verheiden, his housekeeper of nearly 8 years, worked with her usual efficiency. Taylor checked his watch, 5:45 p.m., 15 minutes before her shift ended. He walked toward the kitchen, leaning against the doorway as Martha finished, putting away the clean dishes. "Martha, I see you're leaving a little early today. Let me guess, church night?" he asked with an ironic smile. Martha turned with a calm smile. "Yes, Mr. Stanfield, it's Bible study night." "Ah, of course. And how's your imaginary friend doing today?" The mockery in his voice was evident. "Still solving all the world's problems with his invisible magic?" Martha sighed, already used to her employer's sarcastic remarks. "You may not believe it, Mr. Stanfield, but God has been my strength, especially since I started raising Jeff on my own." "And where was this all-powerful God when your husband walked out on you and your son?" Taylor shot back, taking a sip of his whiskey. "Let me guess. Working in mysterious ways?" He let out a dry laugh. "Some blessings come in disguise, sir," Martha replied simply as she finished wiping down the counter. "Jeff is my greatest blessing, and I know God is watching over us." Taylor rolled his eyes dramatically. "Well, tell your God he should consider giving you a raise because clearly, I'm not paying enough for the level of devotion you show." Martha just smiled as she grabbed her purse. "Have a good night, Mr. Stanfield. I'll be here at the usual time tomorrow." After she left, Taylor returned to the window, gazing at his privileged view. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a message from his ex-wife, Caroline, informing him that she wouldn't be able to transfer the kids for his scheduled weekend because they had other commitments. It had been 3 months since he last saw James and Sophia. Sometimes he wondered if they missed him, or if they were just relieved not to deal with his distant and often critical presence. The message also mentioned that her lawyer was preparing new documents regarding child support. Taylor tossed his phone onto the couch in frustration. He poured himself another drink, feeling the bitterness rise within him, not just from the alcohol, but from the life he had built. A life of material success and failed relationships. The next morning, Taylor was reviewing some documents in his office when he noticed it was already past 9, and Martha still hadn't arrived. She was never late. After another 30 minutes, his phone rang. It was Martha, and her voice was choked with tears. "Mr. Stanfield, I'm so sorry I couldn't come today. My Jeff was in an accident. A car hit him as he was leaving school last night. We're at Massachusetts General Hospital." Taylor felt an unexpected pang of concern. Is he okay?" "The doctors are running tests. He's been unconscious since last night." Her voice wavered. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience." "No, don't worry about that." Taylor hesitated. "Is there anything you need?" "Just prayers, sir, just prayers." Taylor ended the call feeling strangely unsettled. He spent the rest of the morning trying to focus on work, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Martha and her son. He couldn't explain why the situation affected him so much. Maybe because Jeff was only 10 years old, the same age as his son, James. That afternoon, he made an impulsive decision. He grabbed his car keys and drove to the hospital. He found Martha in the emergency room waiting area, looking completely exhausted, a rosary trembling between her fingers. "Martha," he called softly. She looked up, surprised. "Mr. Stanfield, what are you doing here?" "I came to see if you and Jeff, if you needed anything." Taylor felt uncomfortably exposed, as if he had just revealed a weakness. "How is he?" Martha's eyes filled with tears. "He's still under observation. The doctors ran CT scans and other tests." Taylor nodded, sitting down beside her. An awkward silence hung between them for a few moments. "So, he finally said, unable to suppress his cynical nature. "Where is your God now, Martha? Too busy to take care of an innocent little boy?" Instead of looking offended, Martha gazed at him with a compassion that unsettled him. "He's right here, Mr. Stanfield, with me, with Jeff, giving me the strength to keep going." "How can you believe that? Your son is in a hospital bed." "Faith doesn't mean bad things won't happen," she replied gently. "It means we're not alone when they do." Taylor shook his head, frustrated by what he saw as persistent naivety. He went home, but he couldn't shake the unease that had settled over him. That night, Taylor returned to his empty apartment, disturbed by thoughts he couldn't seem to organize. He poured himself a drink, but after a few sips, he set it aside. He was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. He lay down on his king-size bed and drifted into a deep, restless sleep. In his dream, Taylor found himself walking through a maze of hospital corridors. He heard the sound of a child crying and followed it until he reached a room where Jeff lay unconscious. Beside the bed stood a luminous figure, its presence radiating an inexplicable peace. "Who are you?" Taylor asked in the dream. The figure didn't answer directly, but spoke in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Often from tragedy comes a greater good, Taylor, but you must have eyes to see." "That doesn't make sense," he protested. "Suffering is just suffering." "You believe you have all the answers?" the voice continued. "But what do you really know about Martha's life? About Jeff? About your own life?" Images began to flash before him. Moments from Martha's life he had never witnessed. Her praying beside Jeff's bed every night. Her working 2 jobs while studying to become a nurse. Her church community helping her when she couldn't afford rent. Then came images of his own life. His children waiting for him at dinner while he stayed late at the office. His ex-wife trying to talk about her feelings while he checked emails. The loneliness in his eyes reflecting the same emptiness he felt now. Every event has a purpose, Taylor. Even the ones that seem purely tragic. Taylor woke with a start, his heart pounding. He glanced at the clock, 3:22 a.m. Sitting on the edge of his bed, he tried to rationalize the dream. It was just his subconscious, processing the day's events, nothing more. There was no deeper meaning to it. But then why did he feel so shaken? The next morning, Taylor tried to resume his normal routine, but he couldn't shake the dream from his mind. He called the hospital to check on Jeff and found out that the boy had regained consciousness. Feeling an inexplicable sense of relief, he decided to visit the hospital again. Taylor asked Martha how she and Jeff were doing. She explained that Jeff seemed stable, but she was still very worried. Even though he was awake, the doctors were running several tests and hadn't given any kind of diagnosis yet. At that moment, a doctor approached them. "Mrs. Verheiden, can we talk about Jeff's test results?" Martha stood up quickly, and to his own surprise, Taylor did the same. "This is my employer, Dr. Klein. He can hear this too." The doctor nodded gravely. Jeff's tests revealed something unexpected. Aside from the injuries from the accident, we found signs of an undiagnosed congenital heart condition. Martha covered her mouth with her hands. "Oh my God!" In fact, the doctor continued, if this condition hadn't been discovered now, it could have led to a much more serious, possibly fatal problem in the future. We'll need to run more tests, but in a way, the accident may have inadvertently saved his life in the long run. Taylor watched as Martha closed her eyes and whispered a prayer of gratitude. He felt a strange discomfort at the sight, like he was witnessing something that challenged his entire worldview. Taylor stood there, deep in thought, still in shock. From what he had just heard, they walked to Jeff's room, Taylor still unsettled by it all. When they entered, they found Jeff awake, chatting excitedly with Martha. As soon as he saw Taylor, the boy's face lit up with a curious smile. "Hi, you're my mom's boss. She talks about you all the time." Taylor raised an eyebrow, surprised both by the boy's energy and the idea that Martha talked about him. "I hope it's good things," he replied with a hesitant smile. "She says you're really smart and work a lot," Jeff answered honestly, "and that we should pray for you to find peace." Taylor glanced at Martha, who looked slightly embarrassed. "Jeff, please." "No, it's okay," Taylor interrupted, Strangely touched, he stepped closer to the bed. "How are you feeling, Jeff?" "I'm good, and you know what's cool? The doctor said they found a problem with my heart that they can now fix. Mom says it was God who made it happen." Taylor felt a lump in his throat. "And what do you think about that?" Jeff shrugged. "I believe my mom. She's the smartest person I know." Just then, Dr. Klein entered the room holding a clipboard. "Ah, everyone's here. Great. I have some updates on the additional tests." Martha squeezed Jeff's hand tightly. As the doctor explained, "We've confirmed the heart condition, and the good news is that we caught it very early. With the right treatment and a relatively simple surgery, Jeff will be able to live a completely normal life." "Thank God," Martha whispered, tears of relief streaming down her face. The doctor continued, "Actually, it's extraordinarily rare to diagnose this condition so early. Normally, it's only detected when it starts causing serious problems, usually adolescence. The accident, as frightening as it was, may have been some would call it a miracle." A chill ran down Taylor's spine as he heard the doctor unintentionally echo the exact words from his dream. From tragedy often comes a greater good. He left the room shortly after, shaken. Walking through the hospital corridors, his mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. Was it all just coincidence? Statistical probability? Or was there something more, something his worldview couldn't quite grasp? As he passed the hospital chapel, he hesitated. After a moment of indecision, he stepped into the quiet space. It was empty, except for a few flickering candles. Taylor sat on one of the benches, feeling out of place and slightly ridiculous. "I don't know if you're there," he murmured into the silence. "And if you are, I don't know why you'd care. About me." Silence was his only answer, but somehow it didn't feel empty. 2 days later, Taylor was driving to the hospital with a mission in mind. He had spent the past few days in deep reflection, revisiting moments of his life from a different perspective. He had called his children, a conversation that had started off awkward, but ended with a tentative invitation to dinner next week. He found Martha gathering Jeff's belongings, preparing to take him home. The boy had been discharged and was waiting in a wheelchair, part of the hospital's protocol. "Mr. Stanfield, what a nice surprise," Martha exclaimed. "Taylor, please, after everything that's happened, I think you can call me by my first name." He smiled at Jeff. "Ready to go home, champ?" "Yes. And in 2 weeks, I'm getting my heart fixed with surgery," the boy replied excitedly. "About that," Taylor cleared his throat, "I spoke with Dr. Klein. All of Jeff's medical expenses will be covered. And," he hesitated, "I want you to take a paid month off to care for him, Martha. With your full salary." Martha stared at him stunned. "Taylor, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just consider it. Repayment for your patience. With me all these years." He smiled, feeling an unfamiliar sense of release. "And I have one more thing to say, something I never thought I would." He took a deep breath. "Martha, you were right. I was wrong." "About what?" she asked gently. "About everything." Taylor felt unexpected tears forming in his eyes. About faith. About what really matters in life. At that moment, surprising both himself and Martha, Taylor knelt beside Jeff's wheelchair. "I don't really know how to do this, but I think I need to thank God and ask for forgiveness for a lot of things." Martha, tears welling in her eyes, gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "God always listens, Taylor, even when we think he's not there." "I know that now," he replied, with a conviction he had never felt before. "And I have you to thank for that, Martha, for never giving up on your faith even when I constantly mocked it." As he stood up, Taylor felt as if a massive weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He knew he had a long road ahead, reconnecting with his children, reevaluating his priorities, exploring this newfound faith. But for the first time in years, he felt hope. "Can I visit you sometime?" he asked as they walked together toward the parking lot. "Of course," Martha replied with a warm smile. "And maybe you'd like to come to church with us one day?" Taylor smiled, feeling like a different man from the one who had mocked Martha's faith just days ago. You know what? I'd really like that. As he helped Martha settle Jeff into the car, Taylor looked up at the clear autumn sky. A deep sense of gratitude washed over him, not just for Jeff's well-being, but for the unexpected transformation in his own life. He had been given a second chance, an opportunity to rebuild what truly mattered, and this time he wouldn't waste it.